Hello fellow readers, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I just finished reading Iron Flame, book 2 in the Empyrean series, also known as the Fourth Wing series. Here's the thing. Fourth Wing, right here, that book was pretty good. It was flawed, yes, but I liked it overall. So you can imagine my disappointment when I picked up Iron Flame only to discover that it is the biggest piece of heaping trash that I have ever read. I know this sounds dramatic, but I'm upset, okay? I wanted to like this series. I really did. I wanted to prove the haters wrong, okay? I really did. But instead, here I am, formally apologizing to any and every hater out there. You were right. I had hoped that you were just jaded by romantasy, but no, you were so very right. That being said, I am still committed to reading Onyx Storm when it comes out in a matter of days. It might be like tomorrow by the time this video comes out. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I just read this beast of a book, this massive, massive book, and we're gonna talk about it. Fair warning, this video will have spoilers for Fourth Wing, and we'll have a spoiler section for Iron Flame as well. If you haven't watched my review of Fourth Wing, I highly recommend going back and watching that first. It will make a lot of my thoughts make a lot more sense. I'll link it in the cards up above. If you haven't seen my Fourth Wing video, you might not know who's sitting here right next to me, but this is Douglas. He's my bonded dragon. We're best buds, and he's helping me tear this book to shreds. It's only fitting to start a review at the very beginning. Here are my thoughts upon opening this book. Revolution tastes oddly sweet. I stare at my older brother across the scarred wooden table in the enormous, busy kitchen of the Fortress of Erasia and chew my honeyed biscuit he put on my plate. Reading that, I was excited. It starts off exactly where we left off in Fourth Wing, which is pretty uncommon, but I'm not necessarily upset about it. I was really hoping to see what happens right after she finds out that her brother's still alive. But by chapter 3, they're back at Sgaeyl, and we're gonna have to do an entire other school year. My thoughts at this point were, oh no, I have to read another school year in this series? I have to read a whole other book that's just meaningless details about school before we get to the plot? Was that the case? Yes and no. Only about half of the book was at school, and only about half of that was meaningless. Yes, they do go back, and they manage to spin a story that puts General Aetos, Dain's dad, and the man who arranged the war games under fire instead of them. The story they told was that they were attacked by Gryphons, and the post was deserted so they couldn't get help. The story only worked to get them off the hook because they guessed, and guessed correctly, might I add, that the entire idea behind sending them to an abandoned post with an ultimatum had been thought up by and was known to General Aetos and General Aetos alone. Apparently, he came up with this plan all by himself and told none of the other leadership about that, which seems not only like a weird choice for him as a character to make, but also like a weird choice for Yarros to make in the plot. Because apparently all of the tippity-top leaders, including Violet's mother, know everything about all of the battles that are being held from the general public and from all the riders in training, and so they have to know about the Venom and the Wyvern. So you would think that when Dain gives his dad information that makes it seem like Xaden is supplying the enemy with weapons from Sgaeyl that will help them fight the Venom, you would just think that General Aetos would pass that information along to the rest of the leadership and they would come up with a plan together to get rid of all the marked ones. But I'm supposed to believe that this one general heard this information and then decided to plot up a way to get rid of Xaden and the other marked ones by himself without telling any of the other leadership? Why? For what reason? This literally makes no sense. It's such nonsensical plotting, but it does serve the one purpose of getting them back into the school, which is just plotting for the sake of convenience and not for what would really happen or make sense. Well, that's how the book starts, but that is not where my complaints end. There's a major problem laced throughout this entire book, but that comes originally from Fourth Wing, and that is that the stakes have been all the way at the ceiling this whole time, which makes it impossible to raise them, and really hard to justify. Every moment in Fourth Wing and in this book has not only been a very important test, or a moment that will define the rest of their life or their future. No, every single moment in both books has been a matter of life or the loss thereof. The first problem that this causes is one of basic logic. Chapter 4 says, the final test for war games is always deadly, ensuring only the strongest riders move on to graduation. And that's not just in this book, that's all over Fourth Wing as well. But I have to ask, why? Why is that? If they've already bonded dragons, then they're already useful in the war efforts. They already have at least a little bit of magic, not to mention a dragon. I could almost excuse it when it was unbonded first years getting unalived at every turn, but after they're bonded, you would think that an army would just put their effort into training them as best as they can to be the best that they can be. Even if they aren't literally the best, they would still be useful in war, right? In fact, we learn in this book that Violet's year has the fewest number of bonded riders, both from a low number of people bonding to begin with and also a high number of casualties. Apparently they have the fewest number of bonded cadets since the original 6. What? Why would they still allow war games and literally every other moment in training to take out riders if this is the result? Not to mention, because of this, we get frustrating moments like this, where the author uses characters to make in-world justification for things that actually just don't make sense. Violet's friend Rhi says to her, "I just don't think it's worth the lives it cost. Most of what happens here isn't." "It is." My rebuttal is quiet. "How can you say that? You were right there when Aetos fell. Is there any part of you that thinks that she would have been a liability to the wing had she survived a threshing? She was a legacy." "No, I think she would have been a phenomenal writer. Better than me, that's for sure. But I also know that I can't get the words out. I wish that for once you would just say what you're thinking. I never know anymore." "You don't want to know. It's the most truthful I've been with her since returning." "I really do, Violet. It's just us out here. Talk to me." "Talk to you," I repeat, like it's really that simple. "Fine. Yes, it's awful that Aetos fell, that she died. But I think I'm a better writer for having been there, having watched her fall to her death and known that if I didn't get my ass moving, I was going to be next. That's horrible." And she looks at me like she's never seen me before. "So is everything waiting out there for us." I swing my arms around. "That stupid fucking gauntlet isn't just about physically climbing it. It's about overcoming the fear that we can't. It's about climbing after we see it kill our friends. Parapet, gauntlet, presentation. They seem excessive when we're here, but they prepare us for something way worse when we leave. And until you..." I shake my head. "You don't know what it's like out there, Rhi. You can't understand." Violet's trying to explain why all of the unaliving is worth it, and I mean, like, kind of, like a little bit. They do need to get stronger and learn how to power through the horror of the battlefield. That's genuinely true. But, like, they could just have some trainings in actual battlefields. That way the unaliving of people in the fleet would at least be somewhat meaningful towards something rather than just being a part of a stupid game. The second problem that having the stakes at the ceiling from the get-go is that there is nowhere to go from there. Literally right before the final battle of the book, we get this line: "Work together, rely on each other, complement each other's signets just like it's a squad battle." Except it's real battle, Rhiannon sighs under her breath, where real cadets will really die. I'm sorry, I just can't take it seriously if you're trying to use real battles to really heighten the stakes where cadets will really die when cadets really die in squad battles, and all of the other times. Yarros has already turned the stakes all the way up to 100 from the first scene, and once you're there, it's damn near impossible to turn the stakes up after that. Another major issue with the structure of this book that is also inherited from the last book has to do with the big reveal at the end of Fourth Wing. The real threat to the continent is Venin and their wyvern, not the neighboring kingdom Paromial. That reveal was really cool. But when you dive into the nitty-gritty of keeping a secret like that for 400 years, it gets messy. For example, this book reveals that the Empyrean, the Dragon Council, knows about the Venin. So the idea that every single dragon has kept this secret from their riders for 400 years without fail, for reasons that we don't know since we get zero insight into the Empyrean, despite the fact that each dragon is so different and has a very different bond with their riders, and they seem to have different rules that they keep when it comes to keeping secrets from their riders. I just find it very hard to believe that this secret was kept for so long. But it's not only that the dragons kept the secret from their riders, it's also that the riders who patrol the borders didn't know. I will say, this book makes it sound like wyvern are a relatively recent development, which doesn't actually make sense given that they are a piece of mythology that Violet has already heard about, so they've probably been around a while. But let's just say they are a recent development, so the riders at the borders couldn't have seen any wyvern while on their patrols. The riders patrolling the borders should probably have seen at least some Venin in action, given that the Venin are at full power outside of the wards of Navarre. It's just a little too convenient for me to think that the Venin have just been courteous enough to stay outside of view from the wards and the patrols, so that they've never been spotted in 400 years by any of the riders or any citizens that live in the borderlands. It's just so unlikely. But we can't stay on this subject long because we have to get to yet another major problem with the logic of this series. Andarna. Remember how in the last book, Violet bonded two dragons, Tairn, the big black dragon, and Andarna, the small golden feathertail dragon. In the last book, we learned that Andarna is a juvenile, and in fact, all feathertails are juveniles, but that's a secret that's been kept from humans since the beginning of dragons and humans bonding. But the thing is that when they get older, they change. That's implied in them no longer being feathertails when they get older. So, by allowing Andarna to bond Violet, which the Empyrean specifically met about and decided to allow, the dragons put themselves in a position that they have been specifically avoiding since the dawn of bonding with humans. They put themselves in the position where humans would have no choice but to discover that feathertails are actually hatchlings, because Violet bonded a golden feathertail. So when she later is a non-golden, non-feathertail, congrats! You've just told all of the humans your best kept secret. Great job, dragons. Were they planning on literally no one seeing Andarna after she grew? Because that's what they try at first. And if that was the plan, why on earth would they even let Andarna bond in the first place? Especially making that bond public. Couldn't they have just had Violet keep that bond a secret? In the end, the situation changes dramatically enough that Andarna's secret is the last thing from people's minds. But for reals, that wasn't a plan. I think Yarros tries to explain away this collective lapse of judgment from all the dragons in the Empyrean by giving Andarna more sway and respect in the Empyrean than we initially know. But even then, dragons still logically should not have let Andarna bond. At least not bond publicly, because that puts all of the hatchlings at risk by letting out the secret of their great power. Basically, all the rest of my thoughts from this point on include spoilers, so go ahead and jump to this timestamp if you want to avoid them. But the basic takeaway from what you're missing is forget everything I ever said about the world building being even kind of good in this series. And onto the spoiler section. The most glaring deterioration of world building in this book is in the phrase, humans don't give orders to dragons. It's a common refrain in the first book that's meant to be taken as a total given that no one questions, because if you don't, you get eaten. Well, this book totally destroys that idea numerous times. Remember how Xaden was a third year last year? Well, that means that he's graduated, and he is now going to be a lieutenant in the army and no longer at Basgiath War College. But Sgaeyl and Tairn are still a mated pair and will need to see each other every 3 days. General Aetos, in an attempt to get back at Violet and Xaden for putting him out of favor with his superiors because of the story that they told at their return from the events of the end of the last book, gives Violet and Xaden orders that they are only allowed leave to see each other every 14 days. If they alternate who skips class or duty to see each other, then they will see each other every 7 days. Which, if you can count, is more than double what Tairn and Sgaeyl can withstand being apart. 3 days. That's all they can stand. It's described in this book that this length of time would put both of their dragons in a state of near constant pain. Okay, so first off, that is a very stupid idea to do to a dragon that is going to be on the front lines, Sgaeyl. But also, in book 1, there are multiple moments where it explicitly shows how the dragons are the ones in charge, not the humans, and they make the final call. The first time we see this is with dragons bonding humans. Dragons are the one who decides who bonds whom. They are the only ones who make the call. The humans have nothing to do with it. Another time that they show this is that the humans hold a council about whether or not Violet can bond two dragons, but it's clearly stated that everyone knows that this is basically just a show because the dragons are also meeting about it, and they're the ones who will make the final decision. So, if the dragons really are the ones in charge, like the series has tried to say, then it's ridiculous that humans would think they could even make this request of humans bonded to a mated pair, let alone try and hold them to it. This situation is far from the only time that humans try and order dragons around in this book. In fact, there are so many, I made a list. 1. A leader at the school tells Violet that she has to produce Andarna for training. 2. That same leader then punishes Violet for not producing Andarna, which she doesn't do because she doesn't give orders to dragons. 3. A leader punishes Violet for Tairn freaking out when he noticed that Sgaeyl was in danger through his bond with her, and took Violet along to go make sure she was okay. 4. The teachers at Basgiath drug all of the second years in a way that cuts them off from their bonded dragons. Let's talk about those. Take the drugging one, for example. If dragons were really the ones in charge, then they wouldn't just be upset when their bond is temporarily cut from their human for a class without the dragon's prior knowledge or permission. They would just eat the human that did it to prevent the same thing from happening twice. And if someone were to try to punish a human, in this case Violet, because they can't order a dragon around, in this case ordering Andarna to show up for training, then if the dragons were really the ones in charge, then I would expect Tairn to just torch the human that tried to punish Violet. Especially in the situation in this book. The punishment that the teacher gives her is trying to make Violet burn out, which would unalive her. Violet is far too important to Tairn. He would not allow someone to just carelessly play with Violet's life in that way. He would prevent the situation from happening. And again, if dragons were really the ones calling the shots here, then Tairn wouldn't miss a chance to see Sgaeyl because someone is trying to put Xaden and Violet in positions where they can't see each other even on leave as a punishment to them. In fact, Tairn and Sgaeyl wouldn't put up with being told how often they can see each other at all. And also, what is the point in establishing that a mated pair can't go more than 3 days without being apart if you are just going to regularly have them go 7 to 14 days without seeing each other? Like, would it kill Yarros to be consistent just one time? Finally, in chapter 19, we finally get a dragon proving that they won't be ordered around by humans. Tairn threatens the life of a dragon bonded to the human that is trying to punish Violet for not producing Andarna, who is currently hidden away, growing, and sleeping. The fact that it took a show of force like that to get the guy to finally stop telling Violet to order Andarna around just proves that it is not a given fact that humans don't order around dragons. It's not second nature like it's implied, so it's bad world building. Either have it be an undisputed fact or don't put it in at all. Don't do this ridiculous in-between dance. Have the humans who try to give orders to dragons get eaten. The dragons have already been at least that brutal. But let's really dig into this idea further. It's a really cool idea to say something like humans don't give orders to dragons. Dragons are really the ones in charge. But Yarros doesn't know how to write that kind of story. If that were really the truth, then humans wouldn't be the tacticians of the army. The dragons would be. Humans wouldn't tell their dragons what to do in battle. It would go the other way around. Dragons would tell the riders to mount, fly off to meet their foes, then tell their riders when and how to use their signets so that the dragons could win the day. Yarros has too strong of a human bias. She wrote a story about humans going off to college to learn about war and having to face human-based villains. And in her defense, she writes very cruel human villains, albeit they one-dimensional. But you can write really interesting non-human bad guys. Dragons in this case. What if it were the dragons holding back the information, not the human government? Yet Yarros keeps not even trying. Yarros structured the whole series with the humans in charge, then said that the dragons were in charge, because it sounded cool. It's lazy and it's cheap. Speaking of the villains in this series, Yarros brought Jack Barlow back from the dead. Yes, you heard me right. She expects us to believe that not only did having a mountain fall on him, not kill him, but also that the school would dedicate their mender, the magical healer, to healing him nonstop for 6 months. What happened to letting people get unalived in training because it ensures that only the strongest get to graduation? And why him? Writers are constantly falling and getting unalived in countless ways at school. Why aren't they trying to mend them all? And how did Jack even live long enough under the mountain to get saved and mended to begin with? This reads 100% like Yarros regretting getting rid of a villain and bringing him back against all logic. Just write a new villain. All the villains are just one-dimensional evil little dudes anyways. Jack wasn't any different. He wasn't special. This move completely shattered my trust as a reader, and it seriously made me want to DNF the book. And I would have if I wasn't making this video. Now, I hear you in the comments saying, but Emily, it wasn't like that. Jack survived under the mountain because, surprise, surprise, he turned into a venin. But here's the deal. Even if that were enough to explain him surviving being crushed under a mountain, which it isn't, or the fact that the teachers were willing to nearly burn out a mender on a first year by trying to mend the venin out of him, which it doesn't at all, that actually doesn't make it better for me. While I think having a kid at their school purposefully turn themselves into a venin is interesting, having Jack be that student, and making readers suspend their disbelief that teachers would save the worst kid and that death means nothing in this book, that loss of trust from your readers will never be worth a fun little twist like this.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb!
Another unbelievable moment in this book is the trade that they make. They're trying to get an item called a luminary, which will help them make weapons that are strong against venom. And they're trying to make a trade with this duke who collects a lot of things and has this item.
The collector.
Now, the whole time that they're setting this up, they make it very clear to the reader that this collector dude, this duke, is willing to trade his luminary if he can just see Violet wield lightning, because it's super cool and uncommon. Now, Xaden is super not okay with the idea of this trade because he thinks that the Duke will not let Violet leave once she's there, because this is the kind of guy who doesn't let cool things out of his grasp. Violet does end up making the negotiations happen, but the conversation goes like this. Now, I assume you'd like to discuss acquiring the luminary I have in my possession. And I assume you've brought us out here to see me wield before you open yourself to discussion. I ask, it's only prudent that I see what you're capable of before entering into negotiations for such an invaluable item. In what world is anyone supposed to believe that that was how that conversation was supposed to go? I physically cannot believe that anyone there didn't notice that they were handing over their bargaining chip before they even started negotiations. But it gets worse. The display of her powers ends up being Violet facing down with a venom that the Duke has captured and sets loose on her. After that whole showdown, Xaden has the Duke by the throat, and Violet tells him not to unalive him because they need information from him, and they ask him questions about the venom. But then, after all of that, they're just like, okay, let's do some negotiations now. What? When you have the guy by the throat that has the luminary and has just stabbed you in the back, and you decide not to unalive him, that's the negotiation. Right there, that's when you get the luminary. But no, instead they have to agree to take all of the Gryphon flyers in training to their makeshift school in Eratia, where they currently are with all of the rebels and a whole bunch of rebel Dragon Rider cadets. Look, I get it, I do. If you want to have the Gryphon flyers and the Dragon Riders in training all start to consolidate into one force, then do it, by all means. But please, is it too much to ask for you to do it in a way that makes sense? They should have had the luminary in their possession 2 times over by the time that deal is made. Could you really not think of a single other reason to get the Gryphon flyers in the same place and on the same team as our heroes? Well, apparently not. Up next, we have 2 redemption arcs in this book. Count them, 2. One that I think was earned, and one that I think was not. The first one is Violet's mother, General Sorrengail. And I will say, the beginning of the setup for this redemption arc made me mad, because I could see it was coming and I didn't think it would be earned. But it ends up being kind of okay if you squint. The squinting comes in right at the beginning of the book, when Yarros makes the choice to have General Aetos not tell any of the other leadership about what he knows about Xaden or his plan to get rid of him. Because of this choice, Violet's mother is cleared of all guilt of having set Violet up to be unalived. That time, but there are still 2 more hurdles to her redemption. 1, sending Violet to the Rider Squadron in what was basically an unaliving sentence, and 2, keeping the secret of the venom from everyone, which comes with not just not helping the Poromish against the venom, but also unaliving civilian refugees from Poromiel who are fleeing the venom because they come with too much information. Yarros explains away this first point by saying that General Sorrengail knew that Violet was being groomed by the head scribes to go up through the ranks very swiftly and be let in on all the secrets. General Sorrengail just knew Violet so well that she knew that Violet wouldn't be okay with keeping everyone in Navarre in the dark and leaving the Poromiel to deal with the venom alone. She knew that Violet would try and do something to fix the situation, and that the leaders of the scribes would have to get rid of Violet in the end to keep the secrets safe. Which, I mean, okay, I guess. But that ignores the fact that she could have found out about those secrets anyways, which she did. She could have been gotten rid of for literally any reason at any point, especially since the odds of surviving the Rider Quadrant are so low. This does make General Sorrengail less one-dimensional in her decision-making, but it doesn't make her smart. Like, maybe she could have broken the secret to Violet before she found out and tried to explain to her why that's actually the right call to keep the secret. And if she thought that that wouldn't work, then maybe there's just no hope that Violet wouldn't rebel. For the second point, keeping the venom a secret and forcing the Poromish to deal with them alone, well, that's the main thing that makes her need a redemption arc. The book frames this as being the objectively wrong thing to do, and that the right thing is to open the borders to the Poromish and help them fight the venom. But General Sorrengail genuinely believes that it was the right thing to keep the borders closed. She believes that it is more important to keep her people safe, and keeping the venom a secret is pivotal to that, for reasons I don't understand. It was a secret that was handed down to her from the generations that she thinks she must keep at all costs. In the end, she stands by that choice, but she does sacrifice herself for her daughter and for everyone. And I felt that she earned that redemption, even if the way we got there was a little shaky. There's another redemption that I don't think was earned, however, and that was Dain. In the last book, he was a letter of the law, lawful good to a fault sort of guy, a trait that he is mysteriously lacking in the second half of this book. But we get this moment where Dain reads Violet's memories from the fight with the Venom at the end of the last book. In doing so, he learns just what he condemned Violet, Xaden, and the others to when he stole her memory and told his father about it. And learning that he was condemning Violet, Xaden, and the others to basically be unalived horrifies him and makes him change sides, which doesn't actually make any sense. Because remember how the stakes are up here all of the time? There is no outcome of the scenario where Dain gives that information to his father that doesn't lead to everyone involved getting offed, including Violet for knowing about it. Now, if Yarros said that Dain had a change of heart because of the lies the government was keeping and the truth about the Venom, that would be one thing. But him changing his mind about everything because the most obvious outcome happened? Nah, man. It felt like Yarros regretted the choice to make Dain such a douche at the end of the last book and is just backtracking. And Yarros goes hard on this redemption. She has Violet say this to someone who is struggling to trust or like Dain. It doesn't matter how many times I explain that Dain didn't understand the consequences of stealing my memories. Salone still despises him. I'm sorry? Violet is defending him? And yes, he absolutely did understand. Everything at Sgaeyl is life or death. Why would this be any different? This should be worse, even. Oh, and she said that line before she even talks to Dain about it himself, so it's just insensitive and silly. Around this time, there's this whole other plot where this girl named Kat shows up who's Xaden's ex, and she has the ability to heighten someone's emotions to extreme degrees. And the second Kat gets on the scene, the book gets pretty unbearable for a while because Violet instantly becomes an insecure pile of nerves, and it's really frustrating to read. That's so far from what Violet's character has been, like so far that it feels like we head hopped into a completely new person. And here's the thing, adding Kat into this story specifically does nothing to the entire book besides adding a little bit of tension to the Violet and Xaden relationship. And with Dain's redemption arc, it feels like he's getting set up to be the tension adder in the next book. Here's the deal. If you don't know how to keep a story interesting that involves a romance between two characters once they're aware of each other's feelings, then maybe just don't write romance into the story, at least not until the very last bit of the book. This feels like a weakness in her writing that probably comes from Yarros' background as a romance author, ironically. Here's the thing with romance books, which I love, by the way. The plot basically is the romance. So once the two characters are together, the story's pretty much over. But when you're adding romance into another genre, such as with romantasy, you have to be able to carry the story past the getting together and keep it interesting. If you need a case study on this, go read Percy Jackson or the Stormlight Archive. But if the only way you know how to keep the tension in a romantic pairing in a long story is by throwing other people in to ruin things, then I hate to break it to you, but you aren't very good at adding romance into stories. On that subject, Violet and Xaden's relationship in this book is a mess. It's honestly so bad that it's hard to untangle the mess, but here are the cliff notes. Xaden suddenly becomes controlling in this book because he isn't willing to risk her having autonomy and getting hurt now that he's in love with her. But then he says he's been in love with her since the middle of the last book. So this whole moment happening in this book is off, timing-wise, but he learns to outgrow the urge to control her, so that's good, I guess. Next, their communication is literal trash. For starters, Xaden handles her insecurities about Kat by, checks notes, performing oral sex. Okay. Oh, and Xaden's way of being open to her is by saying that he will answer any question that she asks, but then proceeds to have a pit of secrets so deep that there is no way she could hope to know what to ask to uncover them. She does eventually call him out on this at the end of the book, so it's kind of self-aware. But even in that conversation, Xaden says, if you really wanted answers, then you'd ask the right questions. And Violet's all, he's right. I was afraid to ask questions that I didn't want the answers to. Come on. Like, that can be a problem that you guys have. But can we at least stop pretending that what he's doing is being open and that what you two do is communicate? One of the secrets that Xaden keeps from her, that she first has to figure out that it's even possible and then try to ask him about, is his second signet. In this book, we learn that if a dragon bonds someone in the direct bloodline from someone they have already bonded, then that human will either go mad or develop a second signet. Xaden told Violet in the last book that Sgaeyl had previously bonded his grandfather and now bonded him. And so Violet then eventually, after having all these pieces of information, puts it together and asks Xaden if he has a second signet. It turns out that he's been hiding a mind-reading adjacent signet. But see, anyone who has mind-reading adjacent powers are unalived on the spot because it's too dangerous, quote unquote. So he's been keeping it a secret to keep his life. But his power is to read people's intentions, which feels less like mind-reading. In fact, the way he describes it sounds a lot like being able to read people's memories, like Dain, or be able to tell if someone is lying, like another writer who's kept alive. But that's not the point I'm making. But this does explain why he was willing to trust his life and the life of all of the other marked ones in Violet's hands in the last book. When Violet learns about his signet, she feels so betrayed. She thinks that he's been reading her mind this entire time and he's been playing her to get her to do exactly what he wants her to do. This is a big deal between the two of them, and it causes a major fracture in their relationship. It's enough tension that I don't know why Cat was thrown into the mix. We don't need her. But it also feels even more extra when you get to the end of the book. I know this is the spoiler section, but I feel the need to brace you that I'm about to talk about the biggest twist in the entire book. At the very end, to survive the final battle and protect Violet from the most powerful Venin, Xaden turns Venin himself. And honestly, I liked that. It feels like such an interesting choice for the series, and it's almost enough to keep my interest genuinely piqued for the rest of the series. But it does feel weird that just pages before this, we do the thing with his second signet. The second signet thing feels unnecessary at this point because it doesn't really change that many things in the series so far, but the tension and the hurt and the betrayal that's coming soon because he's now Venin is already so good that we didn't need that earlier bit. That said, I have to say, if Yarros can do nothing else right, which I'm starting to wonder if that's the case, she sure can write an exciting final twist. I do genuinely want to know what happens to Xaden in the rest of the series, and at this point, I was really done with the series, so that's impressive. Will he find a cure that will bring him back to the non-corrupt side of magic? Will he die a tragic and beautiful death that will make us all cry? Who's to say? But that is easily the best part of this entire book. And it makes me want to see more from Xaden's perspective moving forward. So far, we've just gotten a chapter from him at the end of each book, but his is the only story that I'm interested in at this point. Also, I think it's worth noting that I found the reason that he turned Venin in the end to be only so-so. If you skip the spoilers, welcome back. Unfortunately, skipping the spoilers skips most of the things that I hated about this book, but that's just how it shakes out this time. But it's not all over. It's time for the section I've titled, "The Writing is So Bad, It Isn't Even Fun." An example of what I mean by this can be found in the time that Violet is targeted by an assassin. And the entire time, the assassin keeps saying, it's not personal, it's about money. Now, the assassin came after Violet within the Writer's Quadrant, and we learned that anyone who enters the Writer's Quadrant uninvited is to be unalived on the spot. So this job brings with it more than even the normal amount of risk with being an assassin. So my first thought when he harped on about it being about money a couple of times and these added high stakes was, there's something here. There must be someone offering such a huge price that someone is willing to risk entering the Writer's Quadrant and then trying to assassinate Violet. Which then made me wonder who has that kind of wealth that wants to get rid of Violet. But the book isn't that deep. It's literally just the most obvious guy. There's no mystery or intrigue. It's just the people we think it is. All of the mystery was uncovered at the end of the last book, and I would be surprised if there's any mystery for a couple of books, if at all, in this series. This series, and this book especially, is just so frustrating because the ideas and the concepts are so interesting. Dragons and griffins and wyverns and conspiracy and rebellion. But there's so much wrong with the story and the plot otherwise that you can't even enjoy these aspects. To be able to write so many interesting things into a series while simultaneously ruining everything about them, it's impressive, really. But I guess I should mention some things I liked about the book too. The side characters got more attention in this book. For example, I remembered Violet's best friend's name. It's Rhiannon, and the other members of her squad are called Ridoc and Sawyer. They all got more screen time and characterization. Even a bunch of new characters got the necessary time and attention, so that's nice. The final battle, as usual, was great, and the twist. That's kinda all I have. I really wanted to like this series, but Iron Flame just isn't it. 2 stars. I hope Onyx Storm can somehow save this mess, but I'm gonna read it one way or the other. So subscribe and stick around for the next installment in this series. Hopefully I don't hate myself afterwards. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you liked it, and feel free to follow all of my social media, Goodreads, Instagram, Storygraph, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight and are linked below. I also make videos reading Wheel of Time and Harry Potter for the first time, so check out those playlists and be sure to watch my other reviews and bookish content. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.